For more than a century during the late Middle Ages, the papacy struggled through internal and external strife and critical disputes that severely weakened the moral fiber and authority of the Holy See, and thus the Roman Catholic Church as a whole. It all started with the election of Pope Boniface VIII in 1296. He's not a nice guy. He's kind of devious, and he's focused on growing the papacy's temporal or worldly power. Rumor even has it that he pressured his predecessor, Celestine V, who really didn't like the papacy, into resigning to go live a peaceful monastic life. So Celestine says, "Hey guys, popes can resign," and then promptly resigns. He's the first pope to do so. Right after that, Boniface imprisons him as like a challenger, and then he dies. So that was nice of him. Dante famously hates him and puts him in the 8th circle of hell in his Inferno. Anyway, at this time there is growing dynastic tension between France and England, warming up to the 100 Years' War. Ruling France is the very determined King Philip IV, nicknamed the Fair, and he needs money to go to war with England. Now the churches in France have money, so he twists an 80-year-old policy that let rulers tax churches in order to finance crusades, in order to tax the churches in his own lands to finance his war against the English. Naturally, Boniface gets ticked off and issues a vehement papal bull saying, "Hey man, you can't do that." And technically he's right, but the document's really angry and hastily written, so Philip just says, "Hey man, I don't really care," and blocks literally all of the income the Pope receives from French churches. Now that really hurts the Holy See's budget, so in 1297 Boniface says, okay, I'll let it slide this one time, Buster," and now they both hate each other. So, a couple years later, Philip gets ticked off at a papal legate named Bernard Sassay, accusing him of treason and sedition, and arrests him. Boniface is, of course, very angry about this, and in 1301 he issues a bull titled "Listen, Son" in Latin, and it reasserts his authority over Philip's increasing infringements on church business. He also claims that he will call a council in Rome to determine whether or not Philip IV still has the divine right to rule France, and Philip is threatened by this because it's where he derives all of his authority to rule. So he summons the first meeting of a proto-Estates General in France, asking all three strata of society, the clergy, the nobility, and the laymen, to support him as ruler, and they do, against Boniface. So now it's Boniface's turn to say, "Hey man, I don't really care," and he issues another bull, the Unum Sanctam, which says that because the Pope rules the souls of all Christians, and because the soul is higher than the body, the Pope technically has temporal power over everyone and can essentially do whatever he wants, overruling the monarchs of Europe. So now Boniface thinks he's won, but Philip and some other people are naturally angry, and they declare that the Pope has overstepped his bounds, so he sends 2,000 mercenaries to arrest Boniface and remove him from office. They meet his papal procession in Boniface's hometown of Anagni. They capture him, they almost kill him, and then they imprison him there for 3 days in what is called the Outrage of Anagni. They beat him, they torture him. One guy who really hates him famously slaps the 70-something-year-old vicar of Christ on earth across the face with a metal gauntlet, and that's called the Slap of Anagni. After those 3 days, the people of the town rise up and free the Pope, who is very shaken and dies a month later. Benedict XI is elected next, chosen by the cardinals because he wasn't hostile to Philip. He gives Philip a clean slate, but he still punishes the people who actually carried out the outrage of Anagni. Then, like so many popes, he promptly dies. During the next election, the college splits into a pro-French and an anti-French faction. Eventually, the pro-French faction manages to attract enough dissidents from the other party to get the Frenchman Pope Clement V elected. Unexpectedly, he decides to stay in France for his coronation, and then he just keeps on staying there for two main reasons. One, he's under the influence of Philip IV, and two, Rome is kind of a terrible city at this point of history. It's chaotic, it's nasty, it's not what you think of today. Anyway, by 1309, the entire papal court has moved to the French city of Avignon, where it will stay for 68 more years. This period of time is called the Avignon Papacy, or sometimes the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. They purchased the actual city itself from a desperate noblewoman in 1345, making Avignon official papal territory until the French Revolution. So, what's the significance? Well, the Avignon period marks a loss of papal power, with popes often submitting to the King of France and generally appearing weak. For example, Philip IV pressures Clement V into allowing him to seize the wealth and land of the Holy Order of the Knights Templar, headquartered within his realm, arresting and executing its members for often false crimes, even pushing him into officially dissolving the order altogether in 1312. This period also marks a troubling bit of absenteeism, as the Pope's official job description is to be the Bishop of Rome, but he's not there. Eventually, they come back when, in 1377, Pope Gregory XI decides to move back to Rome, and then promptly dies. So the College of Cardinals meets in Rome to elect a new pope. Now, the people of Rome are very angry that the pope was gone for more than half a century, and they want the papacy to stay in Rome again, and for all these popes who were elected to not be French, but instead to be Italian, like they used to be. So, the people riot, and they threaten the cardinals into electing the Italian Pope Urban VI. Quick note about him, nobody likes him because he's angry, blusterous, and obnoxious. So then, a minority of the cardinals, mostly French, decide to rescind their votes, claiming that they were threatened and that their votes were thus invalid, and instead they elect Clement VII, now called Anti-Pope Clement VII because there's a different guy called Pope Clement VII. This guy, because he's French, moves back to Avignon. So now the monarchs of Europe have two popes. And you don't want two popes because what happens if you pick the wrong one? Then the other one, if they win, hates you and says you can't go to heaven, and then you can't go to heaven and you're screwed. So, everyone splits up, and the church does too. That's called a schism. And, usually when this happens, after one pope dies, everyone just comes back and falls back under the surviving guy, but not this time. Urban VI in Rome dies, but viewing Clement VII as illegitimate, the College of Cardinals elects a new guy in Rome. And then the guys in Avignon, viewing Urban VI and his successor as illegitimate, do the same thing after Clement dies. And they keep doing this. So after 40 years, they say enough is enough and call a council to meet in Pisa in 1409. There, they decide it's only fair to depose both of the current popes and appoint a new one. So, they do. Then he promptly dies, so they elect another one while they're still at Pisa, Anti-Pope John the 23rd, who was also kind of obnoxious. Naturally, the other two refuse to resign. So now there are three popes, and things are getting nuts, and no one knows what to do. So the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund demands that John the 23rd himself call a council to end the schism. This is the Council of Constance. Now, John thinks he's rigged the system here by packing the college full of Italians, but the council sees this and decides to vote by national blocks, one nation, one vote. So you got Italy, Germany, England, and France. The council decides again to depose all three popes in favor of a new one, Martin V. Now, instead of having now four popes, the backing of Emperor Sigismund gives this force, and this time it works, and the schism is finally healed after 40 years, with just one pope. Again, the effect of this papal drama, generally called the Papal Schism or the Western Schism, is that it further weakens the papacy and its authority. How could someone be Christ's only infallible vicar on earth if there are three of them? It gives rise to alternative theories regarding the authority of the Church, with many contending that it rests not just on the papacy itself, but on the councils and on the body of the Church as a whole. Now, the papacy manages to fight back against this pretty well and reconsolidate its power in the coming centuries. However, the schism weakens the moral fiber and the integrity of the Church itself, and sows the seeds for more and more challenges of papal authority, not just during this period, but also in the coming centuries.